Hello, U.S. history. Welcome to another of Varella's videos. Today we're looking at the American home front during World War I. So we'll be looking at what's happening here in the United States as our troops are starting to go overseas. So let's get started. So, building an army, we're looking at this was a time in our history where we didn't have the size of the military like we have today. In fact, the military was actually very small unless we were at war. So, Congress is going to pass what's called the Selective Service Act. And basically, this is a military draft. It's a draft that's going to require men between a certain age to basically enlist in the military or register for a draft. At this time, I feel like the age was 19, so I don't think it was 18. Today, we actually still have the selective service. And I believe if you are the age of 17 and a half to 18 and you are a male, you need to register. It doesn't mean you're actually enlisting in the army. It just means they're like getting your information. So if we ever have to have a draft, you could be eligible to be called. Obviously, there are all kinds of restrictions, but this was the first time we see this happening in terms of in the 20th century. They did have a draft during the Civil War. um this is different today, I feel like, because our military is so massive in terms of soldiers who are serving, both men and women, that I don't think we're going to actually have to use a draft again. So if you were worried about someone having to be drafted in the military, I think right now there are so many volunteers we wouldn't actually see this. But you can see, oh, here on the poster it said 21. I think 19 might have been England. So between 21 and 30, you had to register. And again, it just means like you're on call, they have your information, they could call you up to serve if needed. War economy. So we're looking at the government stepping in terms of production, and they're going to ask many factory owners and people like Henry Ford and his Model T Ford Company to try and step in and help with the war effort. So the government creates the WIB, which is the Wartime Industry Board. And basically, what this is going to do is kind of oversee our factories and that transition from making things that we have during times of peace to basically wartime economies. So that means they focus on things like ammunition and guns and weapons and clothing and supplies for our soldiers. In addition, the government is going to regulate and sort of monitor how much food we're producing, how much coal or petroleum we're using and distributing, and basically ask Americans to sacrifice a little bit. So you see here on this poster, meatless days. I think there were meatless Mondays, wheatless days, porkless days. So we would try to maybe not use certain items that we could use for our military or even send over to Europe to help feed the civilian populations. So WIB, War Industry Board. Um, Many Americans feel like this is their opportunity to help support the war, even if they're actually not fighting. So World War I was a pretty popular war when it starts. Now remember, it had been going on for 3 years, so we already saw it happening, and now we're actually able to participate in it. Women also will be encouraged here in the United States to build like victory gardens and grow food at home, so that way, whatever food products we have, we can almost like share it with the military. In terms of public opinion, it's actually pretty high. The government forms another agency called the Committee of Public Information. Their job is obviously to inform the public, but I'm going to be honest with you, it's also a little bit of advertising, maybe even bordering on propaganda, because it's meant to keep the focus and the support of the war high. And the idea is we want to make sure that the people here support our soldiers overseas. Also, we want to make sure that the people here support the president. So, because war can be expensive, another way that Americans can support is to actually purchase what are eventually called Liberty bonds, and it's basically like a savings bond. You buy this bond from the government, and it's really like a loan. And sometimes the the time of these loans can be like 30 years. But the idea is you will get your money back repaid to you later, plus interest, and sometimes even a bonus. So the American people will actually help fund part of World War One. This is not uncommon. This type of savings bond, war bond, dates all the way back to the American Revolution. So the American people do feel like they have some kind of role in this war, whether they're actually fighting or supporting it. Here's an example of some of our propaganda posters. Basically, this is probably the most famous. This iconic Uncle Sam pointing, "I want you" for the U.S. Army. This is World War One is about the time where Uncle Sam becomes a little more nationally known. This sort of a figure, this like older white gentleman, basically pointing, saying, "You need to sign up. I want you." So this is a World War One poster. Here's another poster, "Wake up, America, civilization calls, every man, woman, and child." So basically, again, like do your part, whatever that is, whether it's fighting in the war, supporting the war financially, supporting the war with your sacrifice of your products. So it's definitely a war about, it's really a war that's also being fought in public opinion. Here's some sort of anti-propaganda in terms of anti-German. This very famous picture of almost like an ape or like almost like King Kong. We know he's German because you can look up here and see this sort of spiked helmet. This is similar to a helmet that the German army is wearing and the Kaiser of Germany. So this cartoon is obviously implying that Germany is a monster, and maybe the figure that this woman he's carrying are some of the European countries. And here's America with our shield and our sword, and Lady Liberty is gonna fight him off. We have to stop him. So again, this propaganda goes in all different directions. This is a very famous one. You may have seen this one last year in World War One. This Mad Brute. This is actually, I think, a British propaganda that we sort of borrow for our U.S. Army, but destroy the Mad Brute. So you can kind of see again the same thing. This helmet up here, this King Kong like figure. You can see on this bat that he's carrying. It's almost like he's trying to wipe out culture, and it's kind of bloodied. So they're definitely meant to inspire fear. They're meant to inspire anger, especially towards the Germans. So this propaganda has all different levels to it. So what's happening with our people? Women, as you can expect, are going to actually see new job opportunities during World War One. Typical, the men go off to fight. Women fill in for their jobs while they're gone. The one thing I have to say with World War One is that in this war, women do not really picture themselves staying in these jobs. Everything seems temporary. And the difference you'll see when we get to World War II, and that's where you have that iconic image of Rosie the Riveter, is that the women in World War II stay in the workforce. In World War I, they are just kind of there temporarily. We are going to see migration of many Black Americans. Many African Americans will move up north for jobs in factories. You will also see Mexican Americans move north, and you will see a slight sort of migration of Mexican citizens into the United States to work in Southern California. So there's definitely a lot of movement happening. When we're talking about the Great Migration, you'll read about this in your book. This idea that we're seeing different segments of the population go to where there's the most economic opportunities available. And also with that, we're going to see prejudice. Definitely harsh treatment of German Americans. Newspaper headlines like this, um, uh, advertising movies, the Kaiser, the Beast of Berlin. Basically, you can see here it's 25 cents to enter the theater. A 3-cent war tax is right there. So this is sort of like an advertisement for a movie. Uh, German immigrants and those that had German last names really felt the brunt of this war. I think it's very similar to how Japanese Americans will feel during World War II. The difference is there is no internment camps for Germans. We don't, you know, arrest Germans and force them out of their homes. They're not treated well, that's for sure. But it's nothing like, it's almost like the racism amps up when we get to World War II. And of course, there's going to be those who object. So many people oppose the idea of the draft itself. They felt like that was unconstitutional. Many people are pacifists and oppose the war. So there was a vocal group that opposed American involvement in World War One, as with any war. There are people that actually did, in fact, dodge the draft, that when their number was called or their birthday was called, they refused to report. They either hid or fled the country. And this leads us to a phrase that we're going to remember pretty much for the 20th century. And that's going to be the phrase conscientious objectors. And a conscientious objector is basically someone who doesn't want to fight. And they are saying that they are not fighting for moral reasons, but they also usually have religious reasons. Like, for example, Quakers will not fight in wars. So here's a picture of conscientious objectors. You can see men and women in this picture, basically against this war. They feel like it's an immoral war. Now, this propaganda over here, it doesn't paint the conscientious objector in a good way. As you can see, the soldiers here are fighting. They have their guns. Excuse me. And it says, while the shot and shell are flying and the mighty cannons boom, he is tidying up the trenches with a dustpan and a broom. The conscientious objector at the front. Excuse me. So we're looking at this. If you see, it's almost like he's got a clown like face on this person. So many people are very critical of the conscientious objectors, but I feel like it's interesting because they don't quiet themselves down, and they just get more vocal the more people pretty much try to put them down. So much so that our government actually passes two very interesting acts. The first one is called the Espionage Act. And basically, it allows our government to ban what they call treasonable, so anti-United States, anti-loyal, or seditious printed material. I don't know if I like that act because that seems to violate something very important, like the First Amendment. People who tend to interfere with the war effort or tried to have anti-war demonstrations either were fined and or imprisoned. So if you were basically having a rally against the war, that was not okay. And this is here in the United States. Then you have the Sedition Act, which weirdly sounds familiar to me because this happened earlier with John Adams. And it's the same definition. It's unlawful to criticize the American form of government, the Constitution, or military. I feel like the First Amendment kind of covers all of these: freedom of the press, the right to assemble peacefully, the right to freedom of speech. And yet, I think I'm seeing laws that were passed here in the United States that just do the exact opposite. So I want to let you know that there is a very famous Supreme Court case that challenges these ideas. And basically, this Supreme Court case is going to rule that sometimes in times of war, maybe you lose some of your freedoms. So it's okay for the government to do this. You can see here's a summary of the Supreme Court ruling. Individual rights may be suppressed in times of extreme need of public order. So our need to protect the masses is more important than your individual freedom. So, yes, so someone challenged these laws and the Supreme Court sided with the government. So I feel like um, I always wonder if World War One had happened in this year of 2020, would something have changed? I don't know. But this is what happened literally in our country just over 100 years ago in 1917, 1918. Okay, so this is the home front, the American home front during World War One. I hope you took some good notes, and we will stop here for now, and I will see you in class.